very rare to hear someone say, oh, I used to use one of these tools and now I stopped. I've never met someone like this.
Today, I have the absolute pleasure of having JP on from both Ghostery as well as the Brave team. Today, we're going to talk about the challenges of ad blocking and why it's difficult for maybe beginners to get into it and the breakage that can be experienced by new users, as well as what we can do to help people in our lives actually start utilizing those tools. He talks a lot about regional differences between ad blocker usage, why people should probably be using an ad blocker regardless of what happens, what the ad industry actually looks like behind the scenes, investigating trackers, and also a huge amount about search engines and why search engines are actually a big part of this battle as well. I have to say, this is one of my favorite episodes I've ever recorded. JP brought a lot of experience to this podcast, and so I am just thrilled to be here and be able to share this conversation with all of you. And I hope that you all walk away from it thinking about one or two things, not just in your own privacy and security journey, but also for those around you. Today, I want to welcome on JP from Ghostery, and I would love to just open it up for you to introduce yourself and also maybe teach me how to pronounce your full name, because I'm so bad at name pronunciations.
Well, thank you for having me on. I'm from Belgium, so I'm a bit of a mix between French and German, so that explains the Jean-Paul or JP and the Schmetz, which is very German. So call me JP is probably the easiest way to address me.
Perfect. And then, when did you start working on Ghostery? Why Ghostery? What's kind of the origin story there?
Yeah, so I didn't found Ghostery. I'm not the founder of Ghostery. It was founded many, many years ago in 2008, I believe. At the same time, I had founded a search engine, and we came together in 2016 when we realized that as a search engine, you needed a browser, and we built a browser, and we wanted to make this browser a browser that we wanted to use ourselves, and that would include essentially privacy preserving things like tracker blockings and ultimately then ads blocking. And so we became quite close with the Ghostery team and acquired them when they were, their company was splitting between the B2B part and the B2C part, and we just came up and acquired them in 2016. So it's been 10 years.
What were you called before Ghostery?
So Ghostery was always called Ghostery. What the mother company is called Clicks, and it's still the case today. And Clicks was building a search engine, which is now called Brave Search. So we sold the search engine to Brave, the browser, in 2021.
Okay, and then we can definitely touch on that. I don't think people, I'm learning about this as well now.
Yeah. It's all a big family of privacy conscious people.
Yeah, and I mean, I Brave Search is my default search engine still, and so I'd love to ask more about it.
That makes me very, very proud because I founded the company that became Brave Search 18 years ago now. Yeah,
that's awesome. You mentioned building a search engine required a browser. Do you mind expanding a little bit into that and why you say this?
So rather, I think browsers and search engines are basically joined at the hip. It's a little bit like a car and a steering wheel or a car and a navigation system. Let's forget a little bit about AI because the world is changing a little bit today. But the only purpose of a search engine is to bring you to a web page that a browser will render. And if you have a browser, you would rather not type URLs. You would rather type queries and then find the page that you want to go to. So these two things are very, very related. And it took a while, obviously, for these two things to come together because in the 90s, the browser companies were not search engine companies and the search engine companies were not browser companies. But obviously that came together first when Firefox got a deal from Google to be kind of like the official distribution channel for Google. And then Google created Chrome. And eventually you realize that if you have a browser, you need a special relationship with a search engine. And if you have a search engine, you need a special relationship with a browser. Like having a search engine in a vacuum worked for Google for a few years, but this is not, this is like building a steering wheel company or something. You'd be like, okay, great, maybe I should expand to cars as well. So these two things are the same thing, yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think there was rumors that Apple was developing a search engine for a time. And I feel like that sounded a bit off-brand for Apple, but also they build a whole browser. They build Safari, and I feel like their own search engine would actually accompany that quite nicely, similar to what Google did with Chrome and their own search.
Yes, but then in that particular case, money comes in the way, right? Because building a search engine is expensive, right? It's not expensive at the point that Apple could not pay for it, but it's expensive for Apple specifically because they would first lose 20 and some billion that Google pays them. And you multiply that by the PE ratio of Apple, it means the market cap of Apple would first go down by 600 billion before it can go up because they build a search engine that may or may not be as good as Google, right? So it's a very tricky thing to get out of. They tried with Maps, as you may remember, they had a deal with Google Maps on the first iPhones, and then they decided that it was strategic and created Apple Maps. And I think it was a traumatic event in a sense because it didn't work as smoothly as they thought it would.
Yeah, my friend and I, we call them Apple Mapsisms
Yeah,
when it makes
yeah,
these
but
funny mistakes.
and I think that Apple learned from that experience that they should think twice about building a search engine. And it's very unfortunate because obviously they should.
Yeah, and so I want to ask later too. I have a lot of questions building up very quickly here, but I do want to ask if it cost $20 billion to build Brave Search as well. But before
No, the answer is no.
But I did want to, I guess, go back to Ghostery for a second before we dive, later on more into the search engine side of things again. But the main thing that our community will probably know Ghostery for is the tracker and ad blocker extension.
Yeah,
And so I'd like to start with overall what this is trying to accomplish and maybe how it compares to different philosophies taken by other ad blocking extensions like uBlock Origin, AdGuard, etc.
Yeah, so the first keyword I think is extension, right? So we don't pretend to replace your browser. We are an add-on to your existing browser and habits, which means that most of the user use it on Chrome and then a minority of user use it on Firefox and Safari and Edge and everything else. We are available on all platforms, and the main goal is to, on the one hand, it is to make the invisible visible, because if you have Ghostery installed, you will see the trackers, you will see what's going on behind the scene if you're interested. Ghostery was, because you asked about differentiation factor, Ghostery was always the most educational of all the ad blockers in the sense of showing you a lot, right? We will talk about who tracks me, etc. So we do have a deep interest and specialization in trying to make it visible. All of the stuff that we taking off, we want to make sure that you see what's going on. And then because I've never met a person in life who has seen what's happening without wanting to block it, we also do block it, right? Because once you notice that the experience of browsing the web without protection is a little bit like going to a supermarket and being followed by 100 men in black, talking into their little earpiece about what you are buying and keeping up, keeping a list on you and making sure that when you go to the next shop, the same guys are there as well, and sort of comparing notes. No one wants that, right? And so the goal of Ghostery is to make that visible and also obviously to block it, because like I said, I've never met anyone who says, "Oh, I see that. That's really interesting. I'd like to keep that on," right?
Right.
And then a lot of advertising goes away. So I don't think the primary, or at least I know that the primary focus of Ghostery at founding was certainly not to block ads, but it turns out that because ads are connected to these third parties, so to these, men in black that are following you around, if you block them, then you also block a lot of ads, because the advertising model of the web in the last 10 years has basically shifted to something called programmatic, which depends a lot on the information collected by these third-party trackers.
Well said. So the whole concept of making invisible visible. What are your personal views? Because I'm sure you might have seen some of these. There's been studies where they ask people if they care about privacy, and the majority actually say yes. And then they actually dig a little deeper and ask, okay, well, what do you do for your privacy? And it turns out they actually have very poor privacy hygiene. And so where do you think the disconnect is for people? Do you think that people don't see it, like you say, like it's all invisible, and then when you make it visible, then they're a little bit more empowered and they do something about it? Or is it a lack of tools that allow people to reasonably take control of it, and if those were a little bit more accessible? And of course, I'm sure there's many factors, but I'd be just curious for your personal thoughts on this.
Yeah, all of the above. I think that if if the invisible was visible, sort of in the analogy that I gave you, right? That you would go to a store and then there would be people actually following you and taking notes. I mean, they would get beaten up, right? Basically. And the fact that online, for some reason, the world evolved a bit too quickly, I guess, for the human mind, and people are not that technologically minded, and they have something to do, right? They go to buy something. They don't want to look at the source code of the HTML page, and even if they did, they wouldn't be able to read it. So it really depends on a few specialist companies to create product like ours. And then, how do people find out about us? I mean, they find out about us maybe in the store, but that means in the extension store, but that means they already know about the concept, right? So most of the time they will hear from a friend that says, why don't you use a tracker blocker or an ad blocker? And I use Ghostery and you should do too, right? In certain countries, this reach pretty much half the population. Don't underestimate. It can be very big in Europe, for example. But I think in the world, it's probably 20 to 30%, I would say, that people will use it. And people who don't use it, I've never met really anyone who said, oh, I don't use it because I prefer the experience without it. It's mostly because they don't know, they don't trust themselves. There is an issue. We are actually developing a new type of product or a new type of mode in the extension. Because if you block ads and trackers, sometimes you do break a page, right? And this is okay if you remember that you have Ghostery on and you can disable it for that page just for that particular moment. But if you install it on your parents' computer and they have forgotten that they have this, and then they cannot book a parking ticket or a cinema ticket or something, and they think the web is broken, that has the consequences. So some people do not use it, I think, because they don't know. Some people don't use it because it breaks. But it's very rare to hear someone say, oh, I used to use one of these tools and now I stopped. I've never met someone like this.
Yeah, it's quite rare, especially because it requires someone to then get to the point where they know it's a problem. They already did the action to stop the problem, and then they had
And
to
then they go
somehow
back.
go back. Yeah, it's a tough it's a tough path
Because
to take.
the web is clearly faster, right? The web is also clearly you cannot say that because Google will kick you out of the extension store, but your battery on your phone will last longer because it simply uses the network a lot less. And frankly, the web is cleaner, right? And if you still want to support your favorite newspaper with their ads, fine, you just unblock it. Right? It's easy.
Right. So you mentioned this Men in Black example in a digital world, and I have a few follow-ups to some of the stuff you covered. If someone's new to this podcast and they hear this example of Men in Black in a grocery store, it's a really good illustration of maybe what is going on. But I think a lot of people might still go, okay, so what? Right? Because if it's not happening, I don't know it's happening. But what are some of the real world implications you might be able to point to that you can tell people, hey, this actually will impact you in these various ways, and this is why you should care?
I mean, first of all, what is happening, right? Because the men in black in the grocery store, they unfortunately tend to be also at your doctor's appointment later. And so it's not like it's limited to supermarkets or something, right? And then they build a profile of you online, which means that somewhere there are a number of databases that have your full browsing history and they know all of what you have done online, which I mean, just ask anyone, like, would you be comfortable sharing your browsing history with me? And the answer is no. We've done all these things, by the way, at Ghostery, like going in the streets and people, asking people, show me your browser history. And the answer is never, oh, yeah, sure. So obviously there is a problem that people psychologically do not like the idea, right? And it creates databases that if they were exposed, no one would find this amusing. And then basically they are used, that's probably the least harmful part of it at the moment. I think they are used to target advertising to you, which, if done well, could actually be quite useful, albeit a bit spooky, right? So I don't think advertising is the core problem. I think that the problem is you have this nuclear waste of data that is being collected just to serve you an ad that's a little bit more relevant than another ad. And most of the time not, right? Plus you have a bunch of side effects that that are probably not super interesting for normal users, but you will find out that, for example, on some publications are used to collect data and other publications are used to put the advertising. So if you read The Economist, they will deduce from that that you are probably a bit richer, a bit more smart, and blah, blah, blah. And then use that information to target you on a platform that is less expensive than The Economist. So you would wonder, why is The Economist doing that, right? And a lot of websites are not aware of all the trackers that they have on their own website, because over the year they just had this tag, and that business development guy said, hey, if you put this on this, maybe you would have a little bit more revenue, and then they forget to take it off. So it's just a mess that everyone who knows about it, like we did when we acquired Ghostery, we basically look at the browser and we say, why the hell is the browser doing all of this thing on behalf of web pages? And you could not find anyone, including the web page, that would find it good. So the only solution is to remove it after it's built, rather than try to convince the entire industry to stop this nonsense.
Right. And then you mentioned some regions where it might be 50% of people who use these tools. Can you speak to where there's this higher prevalence?
I mean, typically you have countries like Germany, which are, for various reasons, more privacy centric and also more technology sort of savvy. You put these two things together, then and then you need one, maybe, one magazine or one website that promotes the use of these things or explain it to users, and then you have an explosion. So I think Germany comes to mind as being particularly high. Asia is quite low compared to Western Europe, and the US is in between somewhere.
And then you mentioned page blocking and how some things might break certain elements on a web page. How has that been going, especially in light of MV3?
So I don't know if MV3 has a huge effect on it, but basically the way these blockers function, because all of them, I mean, it's not like everyone has a secret sauce in terms of what they block and what they don't block, right? So most of these lists are open source and publicly available lists. And they are done by volunteers or people working for ad blocking companies. And sometimes the tooling is a bit rough, because you will say, oh, block this request. But then maybe a website like an airline is using some specific way to track this request to avoid bots traffic. I don't know. Some engineer comes up with a clever way to use something, but you don't realize when you do the list that blocking it on site X is going to break site Y on the other side of the world, right? So now if you're tech savvy, it's fine. You reload the page, you see it doesn't work, you disable Ghostery or uBlock or whatever, and then it works, then you go, okay, problem solved, right? It's only when you have more, less tech savvy users that side looks like it doesn't work anymore, right? Or typical example is that you will have a sort of cookie notice popping up, and we remove it, but then the site doesn't scroll, right? That sort of things. So if you know how your tool function, it's not too difficult to take it off. But if you forget you have it, which a lot of people do after many years of having it, right? Or just at that moment, they blame the website or blame the Wi-Fi or something, and then they cannot use the site. That's very frustrating. Plus, you have sites that can break and cannot be easily tested by us because it's after the login, right? Or you're buying something and the last step is not working. So these are things that we have to be very careful about. And Ghostery was always at the forefront of really thinking and paying attention to that. Whereas other ad blockers tend to assume that their users are very tech savvy. Right? So we all have different positioning in sort of the ecosystem.
Got it. Yeah, I was mainly asking because I actually can point to one example, because I installed uBlock Origin Lite in Google Chrome for a family member, and they started dealing with some breakage.
You become the tech support, and that's no fun. Yeah.
Exactly, and they actually uninstalled. So they are the person who took that wrong path, but they didn't uninstall it. They moved back to their old ad blocker, which is fine, but it's not my favorite ad blocker.
So we have a mode for that we are going to launch soon in Ghostery. So it's probably good that we talk about it. So at the moment, if you install, first of all, you have this particular pattern, right? You install it for someone else that may not be as tech savvy as you. And then second, the experience with the ad blocker is always, oh, something doesn't work, I need to disable it. So it's a kind of a negative experience. And the default is I ignore it because it's doing its work, but I don't really notice. We have a mode that we call Zap in Ghostery that will launch soon, where you start by blocking nothing. So it's a bit ironic that you start by blocking nothing, but every time you go to a site that bothers you because it has too many ads or it looks like sluggish or something, you click on the Zap mode, and from then on, this site will always be ads free and trackers free. So basically, you can tell your family member that you install it for. Whenever a website annoys you, just click on Zap, and then from that day on, that will be it, right? And they will never zap their bank. They will never zap something where they do a transaction on it because it doesn't bother them. There's no ads. There's nothing visibly problematic. But then they will go to a news site that is particularly overloaded with ads and pop-ups and whatnot, and then they will just simply zap them, and from then on, life will be like an ad blocker. So we don't know if that's going to work, but this is an interesting twist on the concept of ad blocker, especially in the context where you install it for someone else. And it can never break by definition, because what's going to happen, they will zap the website. If the website doesn't scroll afterward, they will obviously unzap it because they did it 10 seconds ago and will remember. And if they keep it on, then we know that it works, right? Everyone knows that it works. They know that it works and they're happy about it. And it turns the experience of ad blocker into a very positive sort of agentic experience where you say, wow, I've taken a decision, I clicked the button, and now life is better. So we'll see. It's one of these modes that we will have, and then next time you install it for a family member, you can try them on the Zap mode and see whether they like it or not.
Yeah, on paper, it's kind of brilliant because it really puts them in the driver's seat. Now, when you zap a site, is it essentially like enabling your typical ad and tracker blocker for that specific
so
site?
then it's exactly so.
Okay.
So it's instead of creating a list of exceptions, you create a list of positive sort of turn on instead of turn off.
Got it.
It's obviously has some effect on privacy, but in fact, it's quite limited, because if you look at how people use the web, I mean, they have a set of, I don't know, I would say 90% of what you do on the web is repetitive, in the sense that you're going to go to the same sites. And then 10% is random because you click on a Google link and you go somewhere. But seeing a tracker or an ad on the 10% is never going to overly bother you, right? It's more like the repetitiveness of something annoying happening on something you do every day that gets you.
Yeah. I mean, it's a great middle ground. And I think I would love to see it. And my guess and my hope is that as people started taking more ownership, they would actually be frustrated at the manualness, and then they turn on the full thing.
Yeah,
exactly.
Of course.
So I would hope that it would be some kind of way to make the tool a little more accessible to people. And I'm sure, yeah, I'd love to try on that family member.
Yeah, well, we'll tell you as soon as it launches. It's going to be very soon. But is you stop where you want, because some people will say, I love the zap mode. It's fine because I've zapped, the first week I zapped like a lot of things, and now I'm basically set up and I don't need to do it anymore. And other will say, well, now I get the principle. I just switch to full mode and I'll go the other way, right?
Yeah.
It's and at least you don't turn yourself into the family CTO if you install it for a family member, or you don't get blamed and whatnot, right? It's
true.
We've interviewed our users and we've asked them very specifically just before Thanksgiving, like what prevents you from installing Ghostery or Brave on your family member computer, and basically that's the reason. Like I don't want them to blame me afterwards because it broke their stupid banking app or health insurance thing or some work tool.
Yeah. This reminds me, I've been thinking about this quite a bit because I use Brave as kind of my go-to browser. I have a few others installed, but it's definitely where I spend 90+% of my time. And I had to set up a new desktop recently, a Mac Mini, and I learned that Brave Sync doesn't seem to carry over to Brave Shield settings through Brave Sync. I don't know if I did something wrong or if that's just a design, limitation. But I actually, one of the reasons why I was kind of late to our interviews, I had to re-log in to Riverside here, because I always enable forget my, or the forgetful feature in Brave Shields, where you log in somewhere and then a few seconds after you close the tab, it wipes all the data from that tab. It's a fantastic feature, but I already have all my exceptions that were on this other computer. Now I have to
they were not there. Yeah.
Now they're not there, and I have to go through all of them again. But it got me thinking. I feel like there is a very obvious use case here where if someone's logging into a service, there is probably some degree of trust they have in that service.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I feel like there could be a more automated way of approaching things for not just ad blockers, but also things like Brave, where it's like, oh, if I automatically log into a service, then add it to the exceptions of, forget me mode. And then it's a little bit more adaptive and easier on users.
I think you touch upon the right point is do you start from an idea that you trust nothing, which is, I guess, the aggressive mode of ad blockers and privacy trackers and generally these tools? Or you would start from the extreme opposite, I trust everything except what I don't trust, which is, I guess, the new Zap mode. Or do you have some kind of intelligent adaptive system to say, well, you seem to be trusting this thing by logging in, for example? Because privacy becomes super, let's say, relative if you are logged in Amazon and you are shopping under your name and your address and you say, oh, but I don't want, like they don't have third-party trackers because they're smarter than that, and they don't want to share the information. So there's no reason, like you're already giving them anything and you've done this very willfully because you want the product to come to your home and not to a random address. So I think the browser, yes, it's right. Unfortunately, and that's probably the reason for sync, etc. You have always to balance privacy, some kind of idea of privacy with the feature you are building, right? And this is a tricky balance because you have a bunch of users that are very idealistic about it, and they say, well, sync should work without accounts and Brave should not know anything about anything. And then, but I still expect them that I get a new Mac Mini and somehow everything carries over without any problem. Now there are methods to do that, but they're not bug-free, right? And it's a little tricky to do. Let's say it's trickier to do than having the Google way, which is, trust us, we'll just put everything under your Gmail address and then it will seamlessly carry over. So you have a balance, and it's hard for companies like ours to strike it correctly, right? And when it comes to these adaptive things and AI, it becomes even more tricky because some users really hate AI. So the last thing they want is an AI to run in the browser to observe their behavior and then take decisions. And other people find that extremely cool, right? So again, lots of different people. And when you look at Brave and Grocery level, you're talking about tens of millions of users and at Grocery and hundreds of millions at Brave. And you go like, oof, like these are a whole world of different types of people, right?
Yeah.
And it's hard to do a feature where everyone goes, yeah, that's the right way to do it, right?
Yeah, I wasn't, I hope my question didn't come across as like hard criticism, because I do love Brave Sync. It's one of my favorite features, but it was more to just...
It is reasonable, and I will definitely look into it or tell the team.
It was more to illustrate
make
like
sense.
The automated more way of doing things where, like, if you log into a service...
And shields and generally exceptions in ad blocker is something that you spend a lot of time by definition building, right? It's hard to replicate because, like, if I would point a gun to your head and say, tell me all the exceptions you have in Shields, you'd be unable to answer, right? Like, it's not possible. Like, it's too many and over too long of a time and too random, right?
Yeah. My best bet would probably be to open up my password manager and just go through all the things there. What are your roles, actually, between Ghostery and Brave? If I can kind of dive a little bit more into you.
So on the Ghostery side, I'm the CEO, and remember that Brave Search used to be the same company as Ghostery, right? They were sisters, and then they separated 5 years ago. So you have Ghostery. I'm the CEO of Ghostery, and I am at Brave. I'm a board observer because I sold them the search engine, and I'm also taking care of Brave Search ads in particular.
Got it.
So how to monetize the search engine.
Got it. And then when it comes to Ghostery going open source, I know this happened quite a while ago, but what was the idea behind making it open source?
I think that in general, if you do a product that relies on, having a strong privacy promise, it does help to do it in an open source way because people can then at least some people can verify that what you are saying is true. In my experience, the reason for my companies to do open source stuff was very often to be able to tell people, you can look at the code. We are not doing what you claim we are doing. People have theories and conspiracies, etc. And it's very easy if the code is open source to point it to it. Plus, as an extension, you are almost by definition open source because extensions are not compiled. Now, you can program them in a way that they look like they basically become unreadable, but then you have software that can make them more readable, right? So in a way, we were open source by design because that's how extensions are. But we were also making promises about privacy, and I felt that we felt that it was very important to make them verifiable.
Got it. And then if you have a Brave user, are they supposed to be using Ghostery or Brave Shields? I mean, I would have my own answer to this, but where do you see Ghostery fitting in someone's workflow versus just using the Brave browser?
I can tell you what I do, and I can tell you what I see other people do. So obviously, the majority of Brave users use Brave Shields, but there is a significant minority that uses Brave Shields plus another ad blocker for double protection, I guess. It's a little bit advanced because there are some interactions, and obviously, how do you create exceptions if you have two things running on top of each other, right? That sort of thing becomes extremely complex, and there are some talks between the ad blockers that they would share exceptions, or at least the signal of an exception between one another when they run on, multiple ad blockers on one computer. So we know that there are multiple people using Ghostery on top of Brave Shields. I've been testing the Zap mode for myself, so I've disabled Shields and used the Zap mode, and I like it a lot, by the way. There are a few things that we need to fix, but it's quite enjoyable. So I alternate and I check, but I've seen pretty much every combination, right? So people using Brave Shields, people using disabling Brave Shields using another ad blocker, people using two ad blockers on top of one another. And we have, that's less of an issue now, but 10 years ago when we acquired Ghostery, we were surprised that many people never turn it on. Ghostery was somehow set off by default and was only showing you the information and not blocking it by default. And a lot of people never turn it on, meaning they were looking at the information, and that's why the ads industry was always of heavy Ghostery users, because they would observe their own trackers and competitors and whatnot. But a lot of people were not blocking. That changed because we made the blocking by default, and then it's obviously changes the distribution.
Got it. So maybe some avatars here to throw your way, and maybe a general suggestion that you have for each of them. So if somebody's just a regular person, they have a full-time job, they maybe have 4 or 5 hours of screen time a day. They're not chronically online, but they do basic web browsing in the evening. Do you have a general tool or browser or extension you push them to?
Well, I think that the first consideration is between, are you ready to change browser or not, right? And some people just can't because, I don't know, the company does not allow them to use anything but Chrome or whatnot, right? Like there are many, or there's such a vested interest because, I don't know. We know, right, that you can import your bookmarks, etc. But some people are just basically married to the browser, right? And if you are in that situation, I would definitely download an extension on top. If you are not, I would definitely consider switching browser to something like Brave. So it depends, right? If you use an extension, you take the implicit decision that you are not willing to switch browser for whatever reason. If you switch browser, you might as well switch to a browser like Brave because there's no reason not to. In a sense, right? Because you use a browser that basically looked at certain key problems like tracking and solves it instead of being just working for Google. Which is all the other browsers. Yeah, there's really no other browser. It's really like all the browsers are basically having a Google deal, which we don't have, and we have our own search engine. But if you must use Chrome or you must use Edge or you would like to continue, then you should use an ad blocker. And then it depends a little bit on who you are, because if you want to use if you want to use uBlock Origin, then obviously you can only use it on some browsers because MP3, etc. And then it's a kind of tech savvy / nerdy / very advanced kind of thing. And Ghostery, we position ourselves clearly into the more communicative, easy UI, friendly to normal people, etc., including the Zap mode, which is then super friendly because it's a very light introduction to ad blocking with a good experience in the sense that you click on the button and you go like, ah, great, right? I've done something and it's better. So I think, yeah, first decision is whether you change browser. Second is if you don't, put an extension on it. I would really not recommend using two extensions on top of another because that's very undefined behavior. There's no real reason, but we see it in the wild a lot, right? So it's clearly people do that, but it's not. It's a bit undefined what happens, I think.
So would you overall agree if with these following avatars as well, if you're the family CTO, as you put it, and you have to install something for grandma to use, I assume you recommend an extension, or maybe even something like Zap mode if that's live by the time this
It
goes
depends
live.
how much time you have to spend to teach and how receptive they are to teaching. And our bet at the moment is that the Zap mode is easy to teach. And if they don't use it, it doesn't really change what they have today. Like it doesn't break anything. It's just the same, right? Whereas if you install uBlock Origin aggressive mode on grandma's computer and then move to another state, it's not going to work well, right? Like that. So these are two extremes, obviously, right? But yeah, it's really that, right? And as you said, it could be that next Thanksgiving you come back and grandma is ready to upgrade to full blocking, or maybe not. Maybe it's perfectly okay, right? Because normal people do not actually go to millions of websites. Like they have their habits, and once it's set up correctly to what they like, there's probably not a real problem.
Got it. And then the last avatar, someone is looking to do things as optimally as possible. They want the absolute best privacy protections, but I assume also evidence-based. So they're not just going to install 5 ad blockers in their browser. So what do you generally recommend as like the most evidence-based approach to ad blocking for users that are a bit more advanced?
Well, I mean, obviously, I'm pitching my own products, but if you change browser, go to Brave for sure, and if you can, just put something like Ghostery on top of it, because these are the most reasonable ones. They don't go too far, they don't break too much, but clearly, you like don't underestimate the complexity of breakage. Like simple breakage is actually easy to fix, and it is generally quickly fixed, right? So if a public website starts showing ads or a public website doesn't scroll, you can assume that these things will get fixed. Where it gets more complicated is you realize that one of your credit cards only works 30% of the time on Amazon, right? Why? Because in 30% of the case, they have to do a call to your bank and do some verification in the background, and for some reason this fails, right? Or you cannot get your boarding pass on United, or you can't book a flight on Air Canada, but you only find that out at the end of the booking process, right? So this is, first of all, insanely difficult to debug because you can't reproduce it, right? Like the people who do these things do not book flights just to see if they can optimize the ad blocker. And then second, it's really frustrating because you've gone the whole way and then it fails and you're not sure whether you should blame your browser or blame the websites. It's really unclear and not fixable. And those examples are all real, right? Like these are not invented. There are things that we struggle with. And so if you're the type of person that finds this aggravation worse than a little bit of privacy leak, you have to decide who you are exactly, right? But I mean, there are some people who claim that ad blockers never break, but that's just simply not true, right? That's just simply not true. Or they just spend time I mean, obviously, if you spend all your day on Reddit and stuff like that, eventually you optimize for that. But if you do transact in the real world and you interact with websites built by governments in 1999 and stuff like this, you're going to hit some really problematic things where you have to disable, not only shields in Brave, but sometimes also more, right? And things that you like fingerprinting avoidance, etc. And these may be difficult. I mean, if you're a specialist, it's not a problem. Like you unclick this and that because you understand what it is. But for normal people, it may be a bit overwhelming to say, why do I have to disable 7 things? and then it behaves like a stock browser. Then the next thing is obviously the more people use Brave or the more people use Ghostery or ad blockers in general, the more it is tested against them. So website can be very, very lazy, and I don't even have to use Brave. But I mean, a long time ago, people stopped testing against Firefox, which is kind of not great, right? Because it means that stuff breaks more than on non-standard browsers. Brave is Chromium, so on the one hand, it's not a real problem. On the other hand, then Shields could be maybe a problem.
Got it. Okay. And then, to kind of pivot away from the extensions, whotracks.me. I didn't know this existed until I met Adam in Cyprus. And I really like the tool. The concept here is that it allows you to get insights into websites, the trackers on those websites, what they actually are used for. So what was kind of the inspiration behind that tool? And, how does it feed into that invisible mission?
It comes from a long history of tools. Unfortunately, we cannot replicate these tools that used to work very, very well. And we called it Tracker Map, which was you would just enter any website and any location in the world, and it was like a movable map of all of the trackers, right? So you would see it loading, let's say, some tracker, and then that tracker would load other trackers, and then these trackers would load other trackers. And you had this really immense tree that was moving, and every time you would show it to people, they would go like, what? Like, is this what's happening when I load this page? And you go like, yeah, exactly that, right? We cannot do it anymore because browsers have become a lot more complicated, and it's difficult to say exactly who has loaded what, and so we cannot build that tree anymore. But what we can do is to tell you this tracker is present on this website, and then if it is there, is it also in this other website, right? So you can see the visibility that they have of your behavior. And then it turns out that universities and a lot of other people are very interested in this data, so we open sourced it. And we spend a lot of time putting names on trackers, right? Because trackers, when they load a request, they don't have a name, right? Like it's not like you don't know what the company is called and you don't know who they belong to, etc. And we spend a lot of time mapping that to entities, right? And by the way, they change names all the time, but you had companies called Blue Kai, and then suddenly it was owned by Oracle. And you would not know that by just looking at a tracker that goes to bk.com, right? And so we try to link that to websites, and that's also in the UI of the Ghostery, right? You can click on it, and if you're so inclined, you can actually learn a lot about who's doing what on the website. And that's also why the ad industry was always a heavy-duty user of Ghostery, because they could see, like if you work for a website and you try to see all the trackers that are running on your website, or let's say in Europe a few years ago when they had to implement GDPR notices just to find out what was running on their own website.
Like
or
how
if
it's
you're a tracker.
retroactive.
Well, yeah, unfortunately, yeah, because it has been built over the years, and suddenly they had a requirement to list that properly and get the privacy notice correctly, etc. So they had to do an inventory, and one of the best way to do inventories was to use something like Ghostery, or look at who tracks me. And a few audit companies use it, so they download the data and help us keeping it up to date. Because they do audits. I'm not sure exactly what kind of audits, but they do audits of websites and probably for GDPR or stuff or purposes to see, is your privacy policy in sync with the actual reality of your website, that sort of thing. Yeah, it's not a B2, it's not a consumer product, right? It's not something that, well, it's interesting for half an hour for a normal consumer, but for the industry, it's quite interesting.
Yeah, no, I definitely see the value for the industry, but I would almost push back a little bit because I think that for a consumer to actually see what these things do and are, that is still extremely valuable. And
yeah, what I mean is that most people see it and then block it, right? And then once you block it, then obviously it disappears, right? And so this is one of the weirdness of the UI that we are struggling with, is that as if you block everything, it looks like the numbers are low. It's only when you unblock everything that you see, oh God, like this is a lot of trackers, right? So sometimes, I mean, obviously people don't do that, but you can disable Ghostery and then you watch the tracker count go up, and then you click on the info and then you see them all. But then again, I've never met someone who said, oh, I'll leave it off, right? Then they block it again and then it all disappears.
so I want to dive a little bit more into these trackers and how they work on a technical level. You used a really good analogy with the Men in Black earlier. following you around. But what is a tracker itself on a website, right? I think people hear this term. I use this term. The whole industry uses this term of tracker. But what is a
So
tracker?
one big distinction that we make is first party versus third party, and that simply means that if you're in the domain CNN.com, right? Everything that goes to CNN.com would be called first party because it belongs to the same organization. So if you download an image, for example, there will be a request because, well, first of all, people don't understand how a web page is built. It's not like a page in a magazine. It's more, first you get a bunch of HTML that will mostly contain the text, and then you're going to download a bunch of pictures, and then you're going to download a bunch of code that will maybe create a poll that you can answer and get the answer, etc. Right? So there's a lot of files that are being downloaded to create and render that page. And some of these files do not go to CNN.com, they go to something else. And something else simply meaning another company, right? And that could be for different purposes. Some of them can be super legitimate. Like, for example, it goes to a CDN, which is a content delivery network, because let's say there's a video on the site and Cloudflare does a better job at delivering that quickly to you, so it will go to a Cloudflare domain. Although, people have become much smarter, so the Cloudflare domain will look like a CNN domain because it's proper to do it that way. But sometimes it's going to be companies that will basically just record, oh, this user, which I know because if you plant a cookie on a user's browser, it is connected to that domain name that plants it. Right, so CNN can plant a cookie and recognize you when you come back and maybe personalize it for you. But also these advertising companies can plant a cookie on you, and every time you go to CNN, they will get, Henry is reading this article, and then you go to another site, oh, Henry is reading this now, and then you go to Amazon. Well, Amazon does not have third-party tracker, but assume you go to a shop that is a bit more naive. Oh, now he's shopping for this, right? Oh, he's been looking at gloves now on this website. Then next time he goes to CNN, that company will give the information to an advertising server that says, oh, Henry is in the market for gloves because we just saw him 10 minutes ago on the gloves website. So maybe we show him gloves, right? Or he's looking for a trip to Paris, and then suddenly your whole web is filled with ads about Paris, and you wonder how the hell do they know? And the mechanic is simply these third-party things, because third-party means that they can be on many different websites as a third party, and they can plant cookies so they actually know who you are. The cookie may not say Henry, but the cookie is a number that is basically you, right? And it doesn't take a genius to link that to one single person.
And what incentive, right? Like why? Because if I build a website, we have a privacy first community. So I actively try to choose services that will not, like we use Ghost for our new website. It's open source and they don't use trackers by default. But when we embed a YouTube video into our website, technically it does show as a tracker because it embeds the YouTube video and then YouTube serves ads, etc. So why does someone like CNN embed these trackers? What benefit is there for them?
So like you have to think of it in terms of organizations, right? Because it's not CNN, there's not a CNN. So at one point in 2012, some salesperson came to a BD person at CNN and say, if you put this tracker, you can get this dashboard that will give you this benefit, which can be statistics or counts or a widget. I mean, let's take Facebook. So Facebook at one point started to litter the like button all over the internet. Right? So the like button was a very interesting thing because it was a little picture, right? And if you clicked on it, you would like it in Facebook, which some people used to do. Not anymore, but it used to be a big thing. But every time, like you could assume, okay, that thing is cool when I click it, but it was also very interesting for Facebook when you didn't click it, because they would learn that Henry, because they knew who you were, like they knew it was Henry because Henry had a Facebook website a Facebook account at one time. And they would know you because they had a cookie planted with a facebook.com domain. So when you were in CNN and the like button basically appeared, they knew you were reading that article. Like the like thing was a complete side effect, like maybe 0.1% of the people would click on the like button, but 100% of the people would be tracked. So Facebook built this amazing amount of information about your preference by following you around with these like buttons. And so why do they do it? Well, obviously they do it because they wanted to have a huge profile of you and then do ads and other stuff. Why does CNN put the like button? Because they wanted to be liked on Facebook, because it gave them traffic. So that's actually a pretty good caricature of what's happening. The provider, the third party comes and say, I have a widget, I have a thing, or it's going to make you more money, it's going to make you more likes, it's going to make you more this or that and whatnot. And then some business development person says, yeah, okay, that helps my goals, and I'll put it on. And then these things just stay for years and years and years. I'm pretty sure you can still find like buttons on Facebook, like buttons on some pages. But now it's not a like button, it's going to be a tweet thing, or it's going to be follow me on Instagram, etc. But all of these assets that you see, it's not when that you click on it that they become active. They are active even when you don't click on them.
Got it. And then you mentioned earlier, the example of Amazon and how Amazon might not have third-party trackers built in.
Yeah.
But how, and maybe this does happen, but users might hear this and go, well, okay, so if everything is blocked on a website, then there is no way for there to be data sharing. So is that true? How do we know that Amazon can't have, I guess, ways of still submitting user data to the same companies?
Let's take the biggest tracker of them all is Google, but you will not find a tracker on Google. And Amazon, you will not find a tracker on Amazon, but they will track you wherever they can with the Amazon ad network, right? So these companies have learned that the economics of data is about collecting and making sure that other people don't collect on you, right? So I mean, if you go to Facebook, there's not going to be any trackers, but they track you everywhere else. I mean, there are other ways to do data sharing, and it tends to be probably a little bit better in terms of privacy. But basically, there are people who understand the game, and they are on the collecting side, and they don't share. And there are other people that are on the sharing side, but they don't benefit much from it. Yeah, it's an interesting world, and I never understood why they participate, but they do, because they like that like button, and they like to have some Google traffic extra, because they got Google Analytics, for example, is a huge tracker, right? And Google Analytics was basically, if you go to the beginning around 2000, well, it was a company called Urchin, but they got acquired by Google. And people really loved to have a free analytics tool just to know how many visitors they had. But the side effect was that they were giving all the data to Google, right? And so Google could know, for example, let's say you had a cool blog about technology and your competitor had another cool blog about technology. So both of you would know what your traffic was, but Google would know what the traffic for both of you were. So obviously it's not balanced, right? Like Google knew way too much because you gave them the key to your data.
The power dynamics are pretty interesting to think about, and who actually has the power in these relationships.
But the root of all evil is convenience, right? So people say, well, I don't have enough money to create my own analytics, so I will just take one for free and I won't pay for it, right? Because Urchin used to be something that cost money. Google Analytics did not cost money, so they made it free right away. And then the other thing is when Google AdSense came in, which I had a small role to play in, also the same thing. Like I need some money, so I'll just put the Google AdSense tag on my website, and then suddenly money flows. There's tons of side effects to that, but the primary benefit was I get something for free or even something that pays me, and I don't care about all the side effects. So Google, probably the best in the world, they basically realized that people were driven by convenience, or web publishers or people who build websites were driven by convenience, and started to give them the drugs, right? Say, hey, you want traffic? We got Google Search. You want analytics? We got Google Analytics. You want monetization? We got Google AdSense, right? And the side effects was basically that Google would know everything about your website and your users, and then would use it for their own purposes, obviously.
Wow. Yeah, really well said. And then just a couple final technical questions about the whotracks.me webpage. First, how do you figure this out? What's the investigative process looks like? How, do you find this domain and then you have to figure out like the certificate authority and then?
Well, so yeah, exactly. So basically when we do our work, which is basically observing the traffic that goes out to third-party domains on a given web page, we basically catalog. We basically count, right? We count, oh, there's 17 requests to this domain and that domain, etc. Then either we already know the domain, so we know exactly if someone has taken the time to take a look at this, or we go into a little investigation. We say, who owns that domain? What does it look like it's doing? Is it a CDN? Is it something? And then we put it into categories. And then we find out who owns the company by looking into, basically it's web search, right? And AI is actually pretty good at helping in these days, trying to help you. And then we just put it in the Who Tracks Me database, which then benefits all of our users and all the people who use the Who Track Me database or products.
Very nice. And then you mentioned this tree image of how it used to work. Just to clarify, is what you're saying that tree still exists? It's just hard to verifiably prove that's how it works because of browser technology?
Yeah, it's harder to build, because in the old days you could, whenever you saw a third-party request emanating from the browser, it had a clear parent, meaning that you could tell who was requesting it, right? So let's say you land on CNN.com and it calls Google Analytics. The Google Analytics call would say CNN.com did that, right? So you could say, okay, there's a connection. But then you will have more complex things like Tealium, which is a kind of tag manager, or Google Tag Manager for that matter, right? So a tag manager is call a bunch of other things. And in the old days, you could always say, this company, BlueKai, has been called by Google Tag Manager. But in the meantime, the browser is much more efficient and tries to do a lot more preloading. Like you have a lot of optimization techniques within the browser that doesn't allow us to say, it was definitely this thing calling that thing. So then you cannot build a tree that you can 100% guarantee is exactly what happened, right? Even partially between websites, because sometimes you're in Google search and it's already preloading the next page because it thinks that you're going to click on the first result, right? Like you have a lot of optimization in browser to make it fast that don't allow you to create a perfectly great tracker map. But the tracker map was an impressive thing to look at. Like you would look at it and say, I don't like this one bit, right? Because people are still stuck in the mental image that the web is like a magazine, that you turn to a page and the page is one item. Like they don't imagine the thing being the combination of 100 requests to the internet. Because then the next question is like, why 100? Why not 3, right? And that's a good question, because why do you need so many requests? You don't. You need one request for the text and then one request for each picture, and then maybe a couple requests for some JavaScript to do some animation, and then you run out of ideas. So why are there 100? Well, there's 100 because there's Google Analytics, and then there's this, and then there's Tealium, and then there's Tag Manager, and then there's this, and that, and that, and that. All the stuff that if you use an ad blocker, you can block, and you see not only no difference, but actually everything goes faster, and it's a lot cleaner.
Very nice. And then, kind of where I'd like to finish off in terms of categories is search. So on the Ghostery's website, I saw there's a private search tab. Is that just Brave Search? Like, what's the difference between that and Brave Search?
It is using the Brave Search API, which is kind of what do you call it? Well, it's a search API, so it allows you to turn it into whatever look you want, right? Including some of the biggest AI companies in the world use Brave Search API to help create whatever AI companies do in their answers. So it's a really huge product.
Claude uses you guys, right? Claude.
This is one of the things that we cannot talk about officially, but people look at the privacy policies and they figure it out by themselves. Yes. So yes, there's lots of big companies that use Brave Search API. It's there's only 3 big indexes in the world, right? There's Google, there's Bing, and there's Brave. So these are the only 3 that can answer every question at a level of quality which is nearly the same. And Google does not license their search results that easily. Some people find loopholes in how to get them. Bing has stopped licensing it in August last year because they want to keep it all to themselves. And Brave is the only one licensing it to pretty much everyone who wants to have them. And private search is important because, coming back to the Ghostery private search, is if you really want to be private, it's very tricky to search in Google because Google will basically put your name on every search that you do. And even if you say it's private, they will know that you did this search. And they probably know every search I've made in Google for the last 25 years. I haven't used Google search for probably the last 5, maybe even more, because of Brave Search, but it's hard to care about privacy and use Chrome and Google search, let me put it this way. Or basically, your privacy stance means I don't trust anyone, but I trust Google totally fully, right? Which is, I guess, reasonable if you want to. But it's hard to say Google is the biggest tracker in the world, but that's okay because they're the biggest, so I'll keep that one's okay, right? That's a bit contradictory. And Brave, for example, never, and obviously not Ghostery as well, we never associate a query with a person, nor do we keep track of any kind of identifier between queries. So we just don't know what Henry did yesterday and what Henry does today. And even in 5 seconds after you do one query and you do another one, they are not connected.
Got it. And so the terminology I've used and I've heard is a meta search versus like an independent index. So something like DuckDuckGo uses a lot of Bing,
Bing.
And then we have like Start Page uses Google. And I feel like it's pretty well established what the benefits are to using even those services, which is they are, it might shift trust, but they are guaranteeing a layer of privacy by shifting the trust to them instead of the native company.
Yeah, there's a trick to that because it breaks with advertising. So if you use DuckDuckGo, that's fine. I think the claim to say they are not tracking your queries and they're not associating it with your name is totally there. But the problem is they also use the Bing ads, and the Bing ads will try to track you to see if you convert on the websites that you go to, right? So the privacy promise you have to. So by the way, the web was remarkably private until advertising became programmatic, right? Like Google search was actually, I would say, very private until very late 2012, 13, 14, right? Because the only component to targeting and advertising, I would say even up to today, is whether the query that you have is relevant to the ad that you see. So if you look for lipsticks, they don't care if you're a man or a woman. I mean, that's absolutely plays no role in the targeting. Whereas, if you look at the more Facebook type of advertising that started around 2008 or 9, it's all about who you are rather than what you are looking for, right? And then these two things started to, unfortunately, merge a little bit too much, and tracking started to go completely out of hands. There's a reason why ad blockers started in 2008 and not in 2002, right? Or anti-tracking things. But in any case, if you use Brave or any private search from Ghostery, so Ghostery private search is a little bit more like DuckDuckGo, I guess, right? Because it uses another index. Brave is the only one where your query is not getting anywhere else than Brave.
Yeah, I would like to just clarify here the nuance. So because if I read DuckDuckGo or Start Pages, technical information, they kind of lean into contextual advertising as their main way to advertise, which means if I look for baby diapers, then it might serve me ads for baby diapers, but it won't conclude that I'm looking for baby diapers because of an unrelated search term. So it only uses that one search term. So where
That's
is
true
the
of Google as
privacy
well, yeah.
concern come into that question? And how does Brave Search compare to that
So
model?
then it becomes like you have to look into the details, right? So if you have one of these search engines, typically they will load the ads from the client side. It depends if they load it client side or server side. But what they will all do is to try to track you after conversions, right? Because they need to, the customer that buys the ad for a lot of money, because search ads are very expensive, needs to know that the conversion that you received actually emanated from the click that was paid to, say, DuckDuckGo, Start Page, or whatever. And that's where there's a privacy concern, because then you say, well, we are an ad blocker and we block everything, except we don't block what is a conversion channel. And that's a problem. Now, the problem is less important in recent years than it used to be, because pretty much everyone, including Google, is recommending big shops, etc., to do attribution by first party only, or meaning that they should not use external tool to do their conversion tracking, because these are likely to be blocked. And then, in countries like Germany where you have 40% ad blocking, then obviously all these things get blocked, and then you don't really get a good attribution anyway. But it was just a note that if you control everything, I think you can demonstrably prove your privacy stance. If you don't control because you use yourself third party to do your search, then obviously you are yeah, it's hard for you to prove that you are doing a safe job. And I don't want to criticize all of these meta search, as you call them, right? It's a perfectly legitimate type of business. It's just that when I founded what became Brave Search, it was very important to me to not go that route, because once you go that route, I think it's nearly impossible to build, because it's too convenient to continue using that third party, right? It's cheap, sometimes it even makes money right away. And you have different versions of that, right? Because Google search in Firefox, you could call it Firefox search as well, right? But it's very difficult for Firefox to remove themselves from that relationship, or Safari from Google relationship, or DuckDuckGo from the Bing relationship. It becomes nearly impossible after a while. And we took the very strong decision from day one to start to build everything from scratch and everything by ourselves without external dependencies. I wouldn't say that it was for privacy reason, right? Like I don't think that was the motivator. It was more for engineering pride or something. Like it's like we might as well do it right. And then it became clear that when we started to build a browser, which was around 2016, around the same time where we acquired Ghostery, we were like, well, if we build our own browser, we're going to build it with privacy in mind, because we've seen, because when you do search, you collect a lot of data. You look at a lot of data and you go like, oh, that's pretty bad what's being collected. I don't want to be part of this. And then you start to think about privacy. But the main driver for what became Brave Search was purely engineering pride and the desire to build it all to be fully sustainable and independent.
Got it. And then I do want to quickly touch on the indexes. I only have a couple questions left here, but I did just want to briefly ask, Brave Search ads, how are those served, and how is privacy respected in those ads, in your version of those?
Well, in different ways, right? So first of all, they are only targeted by the query, so we don't. There is no sense of, oh, this user is this, and therefore they will get this ad versus this other ad. So that doesn't happen at all. The second thing is we don't create a profile, so we don't know who has seen what ad, nor who has clicked on what ad. And there's a limitation to our customer. Unless they use first-party tracking, they will not be very happy with Brave ads, because they will not be able to attach the attribution to the click, right? But luckily, most of the biggest spender in search ads have learned that lesson in the last 5 years or so, and have all pretty much very solid first-party tracking, which is really not a problem, right? Because if you go book a trip at booking.com, obviously, at one point you're going to register and you're going to have your flight ticket under your name and not someone else's name. And the only thing that they do is they plant a booking cookie for you, which is not tracking, because it's not tracking you between booking and then CNN and then your doctor's office and whatnot. So we have only rarely issues with customers when they use third-party tracking, and this is mostly very, very small customers. But we don't, like for Brave, it's not a good match, because if you have 1 or 2% market share, it's very difficult to target very small customers, because for them it's going to be very small as well, right? So we function very, very well with huge customers and not so much with small ones.
I was just going to ask, why are there no major indexes? There's Google, Bing, and you guys. Seems like the major ones. So what are the challenges, and why did it not take $20 billion for you guys to do it?
So first of all, I think the main issue is that you really, really, really need to be passionate about building it, because you can go get it all for free, right? So in 2008, if you wanted to do a search engine like Ecosia, Quant, DuckDuckGo, more or less all appeared in these years, right? 2008 to 2016. You could just pick it off the shelf. There was even Yahoo was doing something called Boss, which was build your own search engine, right? So you could get something for completely free, and then you could focus on the fun part of packaging, putting your name on it, marketing, all the soft skills, right? So you needed to find crazy people like me and Josep Pujol and other people that basically said, no, I really want to build this stuff. I don't want to just get it and paint it, which was crazy, because no VC would finance it, because they were like, come on, you're going to compete against Google? That's crazy, right? So it was essentially mission impossible. And I would say that only in the last year, it became, I think there's like 5 companies in Silicon Valley that I know of very well, plus all the big major AI lab. They're all pretending to build search, which is ironic to me because you do something for 18 years and everyone thinks you're crazy to even think about doing something like that because you can get it for free without doing the work. And then suddenly everyone needs it, right? So I don't know if you can call that good timing because 18 years is pretty bad timing, I would say. And very frustrating, but it is very difficult because you need to essentially learn all the web functions. You need to learn how people talk to the internet. You need to have enough users to see enough queries. But unless you have a good search engine, you cannot, why would they use you? You have to solve an insane amount of problems. And for most of the time without any economic benefit, because neither VCs nor big companies like Apple would, and they were always respectful, right? So the nice thing is that everyone knows that building a search engine is hard. So you would get a lot of sympathy from everyone saying like, wow, this is really courageous and really hard, etc. But you would not get that much money, except now. Right now, everything has changed about a year and a half ago. That's the realization that every AI needs a search engine to talk to.
Yeah. And it's quite fascinating too. And we're starting to see this play out. I think there's been a huge messaging shift in the last month where beforehand ChatGPT was kind of seen as the king of AI. And now in the last month, everybody's
Oh, yeah,
convinced that Gemini is kind of the way forward because of Google's stuff. But now it's, Google is probably making it very hard to access their search. And so Google's reserving that for their own AI, and all these other AI companies now have to scramble.
You have a lot of movement. So Google has decided to sue SERP API. SERP API is a kind of a company where you can send them a query and they tell you what Google showed, right? Because they will just basically query Google from some botnet or something. And so a lot of the big AI were using that. I don't want to name names, but they were using it. So now they're under, at least there's some stress from Google because you can feel that Google is not essentially, will not make it easy in the future for for a machine to get Google results by
But they can
just
get it.
acting like a user. But they can get it, exactly. And we've done some internal experiments at Brave using many, many thousands of queries to check how much of like when you get a really good answer, how much of that is coming from my AI is super smart versus my data is super complete, right? And it turns out that the data is super complete is quite a bit more important than the smartness. Both are important. But if you take the best model, let's say something like ChatGPT or Anthropic, combined with a SERP API type, I just get 10 blue links and a few snippets, it will not beat Brave Ask or XAI, which uses Brave quite a bit, because they get the full scope of data. And Google is, and unfortunately this is a game that they know how to play, can increase their quality on demand. So they can decide to ramp it up or ramp it down. And they just decided to beat ChatGPT at the moment by a little bit. But they could go a lot more. But obviously, it costs a lot of money because if you start to ramp it up, something that used to cost them probably a few cents per thousand is starting to cost them like a few tens of a cents per thousand, right? And the economics are not great. And we've seen that in different countries. Like I ran, or I'm still running a search engine in Vietnam, and as soon as we were getting good, Google became better, and then we would get better, and then Google would beat us again, like 5 seconds later. Like they did it in Turkey with Yandex. As soon as they have competition, they know how to ramp up the quality. And so that's going to be the name of the game, I think, in 26, is that people are going to realize I need a really good search engine, a really good AI combined with a really good search engine in order to beat Google, which has basically both, right?
Right. Really well said.
And it's going to be interesting because, 2 years ago, I remember, I'm friends with a lot of these AI guys, and I wrote an email to probably one of the most famous one on the 31st of December, 2022, saying, you're going to need a search engine. And we're like, yeah, maybe, maybe not, And then at the end of 23, it was like, yeah, probably. At the end of 24, it was like, oh shit, can we get access to your search API? And so the realization is that the AI needs contact to the world, and the contact to the world is first through the search engine and maybe later to the browser. Because then you bring user, which is the user agent, is the browser is called the user agent. And so the user, the open web, the AI and search come together. And unfortunately, Google has all the pieces already. So the other ones have to kind of put them together. I
Wow.
say unfortunately because I don't want Google to win again everything, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think that, when you put it that way, it really demonstrates the importance of what you're doing and why there's a lot of dependence on it now because people need access to that data and they're not going to get it from Google and Google doesn't want to share it.
Yeah.
And I've seen this myself. I think people can actually test this themselves. If they use even the highest quality model, like if you go to the highest quality ChatGPT model or you use Claude Opus, but you just, paste 10 URLs into it and rely on it to fetch data from the URLs, it's horrible. But if you actually copy and paste the article content into the AI model, you'll actually see it's far better in terms of its performance and it won't
You can
hallucinate.
simulate that, and since you use Brave searches, I don't know if you know the trick. I mean, you can click on the ask button, but I don't do that personally. What I do is I add 2 question marks at the end of queries where I want a more AI experience, and then it gives you the AI experience. Try it; it's fantastic because you can tell, right? Sometimes you say, "Oh, I just want the link because I'm looking for the menu of that restaurant. I don't want an AI to summarize the menu or whatever," right? But sometimes you say, hey, how do I reset the tire pressure monitor on a Toyota some XYZ? Then you put 2 question marks and then you get like a detailed instruction, like turn, just make sure your tire pressure is okay. Go to here, go to there, do that, do this, right?
I didn't know that existed. It's like a
Yeah,
it's like
do
a
that.
search bang for like triggering the AI response.
Yeah, because you have different modes, right? You have normal web mode, you can go to images or video or news, the usual modes. But you also have the ask mode, which is this experience, which is AI experience. And you can
It does work.
click that after you type, right? But if you already know you want an AI experience, just put 2 question marks and you'll get it.
Got it. And but out of curiosity, on the opposite end, because now I know this, that's actually I just tried it out. I just typed in hello there and did the 2 question marks, and yeah, it just goes right into the ask mode. Do you guys? I know DuckDuckGo has like a no AI URL if people don't like the AI at all. Do you guys do something similar with Brave?
Yeah, well, we are aware that some people just don't like AI, right? So we need to provide some, opt-in, opt-out, etc. And we still sort of think, I mean, at the moment we have 2 types of AI in the browser. We have the thing that comes in search, which is mostly trying to guess whether it's a normal 10 blue link kind of thing, or whether it's a thing that should have a little summary on top, or it's a thing that should get full ask mode, right? Which is the 2 question marks. I'm not sure whether we have a place where you can opt out of these things, but it's been discussed for sure. Because some people just don't like it, but it's a very small minority, of course. And then we have Leo, which is a thing that you trigger, so it's by definition opt-in, right? You go like, I want Leo to take a look at my webpage, so that never happens automatically. But it's clear that there will be a subgroup of people that basically you don't want to force AI upon. I don't think it's wise for any company to optimize specifically for these people, except by giving them the choice, right? Because if not, you end up with a pretty strange target group. And we know that the future is, for better or for worse, I don't think you can take intelligence out of the world, artificial intelligence out of the world when it's in the world. Like, it doesn't work that way, right? But we're aware that some people don't like it and you get some pushback. But yeah, the question is really what to do about it and how much resource to invest into providing tools for these people. But frankly, I've never really met someone who doesn't like these things. I mean, these things that we do in search, right? I've met people who don't like ChatGPT or don't like or like agentic browser or cannot imagine that the browser will buy them tickets, etc. Which is, by the way, also something that I would not do because I don't want the browser to do something slower than I can do myself, that sort of thing. But I just heard an example from a colleague that was doing some research or some building permit research in the UK, which apparently is a very tedious process of going from website to website. And he just asked the agent take a mode of Brave to just go and do it for him. And that worked out very well. And that I can imagine, right? A very tedious process that you have to do but don't want to do. Booking your vacation, in my experience, people actually like doing that themselves, right? or ordering food or something is not good examples because people enjoy the process. But filling your taxes maybe, or filling documents that are totally tedious and completely not relevant, maybe, right?
Right. So what's next for you? What are you looking forward to in 2026 that you're able to share for Ghostery or Brave or anything else?
Well, I think on the whole, growing these products, because we believe both on the Brave side and the grocery side that it's definitely not reached the limits of what we can do by far. And second, I think more on the AI part is to discover what is the true killer use case in a browser for AI. Because we have some ideas, but all of the things that are floated at the moment, like buying your trip automatically and stuff like this is not real. This is not changing the world, and it also misunderstands what people do with browsers, right? What normal people do with browsers ranges from watching porn to watching sports to betting to doing very, very enjoyable thing, let's say. I don't see why the summary of an enjoyable thing is enjoyable, right? And so we need to move past that and figure out what is the web of tomorrow, what is the open web of tomorrow, rather, with AI in the world, right? Like, is it a world where every small service provider, like a hairdresser, is able to create an incredible website that can talk to man and machine equally good, and you can make reservations and pay and have, do complicated things. And the hairdresser does not have to spend $25,000 with some kind of provider that screws them and doesn't do the work right. Like the whole process of building the web used to be very easy 30 years ago because it was that simple and couldn't do anything anyway, right? It was very basic. And then it got ultra complicated and it became, unfortunately, too difficult for most people. And then they started to go into, oh, I'll create my Facebook shop or my Facebook page. And then that became Instagram, and now it's maybe TikTok. And I think we need to find a solution as a browser to say, no, we want every single business person, influencer, whatever, to be also on the open web and to be equally accessible to man and machine, depending on what they do. Because if you can say, hey, book me an appointment at the hairdresser for next Wednesday to your browser, and then it can basically interact with the hairdresser site and then say, okay, confirm, or say, well, Wednesday doesn't work, but Friday at 4 would work. And I just checked your calendar and it's actually like you're free. Then you say, okay, that starts to make sense.
Yeah, this goes back to the convenience point you brought up earlier, because as a publisher, and this goes for any video content creation, the default is YouTube. It's free. And not only is it free, but if you get enough views and engagement, there's
You get paid,
ad revenue as
of
well.
course.
And there's no maintenance. You don't have to have any technical experience or knowledge to get started on it. But that's the default nowadays. And same thing goes with like blogs, everything out there if you're starting a business. And it takes so much active effort to get away from those systems. Like I cannot tell you how many hours I've wasted. It's not wasting because it feels like wasting in the middle of doing it, but just maintaining a PeerTube server. I'm not like extremely technical with this stuff, but weekends it just randomly breaks. The auto sync is totally broken. I rip my hair
No,
out just
it's
trying to
tough.
maintain this alternative
Yeah.
platform. And I think it's worth it for our audience because I want something to be accessible away from Google and that's open source and that we host the videos ourselves. But I
Yeah.
can't blame publishers in this
Lovely.
current
No,
state.
of course. And I think the web has become, before 1999 or so, it was not really a publishing, like it was not SEO, for example, was not a thing, or even advertising was not fundamentally a thing at that time. And you would have a lot more websites that had other interests than making money from ads, right? And then it became this loop: search, SEO, brings traffic, make ads, make money, and then you create a gigantic washing machine. And we have to sort of reinvent that, right? We have to find out the motivations that people have to build open web sort of presence, and the economic incentives to do so. Now, if you're a hairdresser, it's clear, right? You want people to come and get a haircut. If you sell words and pictures, then you will have to have some kind of payment in advertising or something else, right? And I feel that we will have to reinvent all of that because it's all being disrupted. Like the old search model of just optimize your search engine for the queries of my users, and then you will get traffic, and then I give you analytics and I give you financing, is probably broken. Not so much on the YouTube, like on the video side, I think it's not broken at all, because it's about time of spent, right? It's not the same to listen to this interview as to get a 5-sentence summary of it, right? It's not the same. But for a lot of written content, maybe unfortunately for the content, the summary is same or if not better than the content itself. And so that's why video and entertainment in general has a lot more, you want to watch the football game, you don't want to have a summary of it, right? It's not, and AI, I mean, maybe AI will create football games, I don't know, but are they going to be as exciting as the real one? Probably not, right? So anyway, we have an interesting 10 years ahead of us, because we're going to have to reinvent pretty much everything.
Wow. Okay. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to be here. I know I kept you
My
for
pleasure.
a long time, so I really thank you for that commitment. And how can people follow you and what you're working on if they want to check you out? And we'll be sure to leave links in the description.
So that's an interesting thing. I'm remarkably unsocial. So I don't really tweet. I don't do LinkedIn. I don't do Instagram. I don't do many of these things. But just keep using Brave Search and that sort of thing, and use Ghostery if you want to stick with Chrome, and you'll be in good hands. You'll be benefiting from whatever I do without me talking. Or you invite me back once a year and we talk.
Yeah, no, I'd love to have you on. I mean, I'd love to see, maybe every January what you kind of are looking forward to and what actually happened in the year prior.
Yeah, we can do that.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, JP.
Perfect. Thanks.
There you have it. I want to thank JP for his time and for being on this podcast. I definitely appreciate everything he did and all the information he shared, which came from clearly years of experience. I also want to thank you all for watching and showing up and taking your digital rights journey seriously in this day and age. You being here is also empowering those around you as well. Now, if you want to be more direct, definitely share this podcast and share the work that we have with your friends and family. And also make sure you're subscribed and leave a rating and or leave a comment or a like, depending on which platform you're on. All that engagement really does help grow this podcast so we can get this information in front of as many people as possible. So I want to thank you all for being here. If you want to really support what we're doing, you can become a Techlorian down in the description, which is a paid membership to support what we do. Otherwise, I'll see you guys all in the next one.